I call out to Kansas City and get this awesome supervisor. He's like, "Are you kidding me? I've got 15 task force officers that would love to make double overtime." So they go out and they kick in the door. The guy's 25. He met this little girl on the internet and had taken her out to Kansas City. And they kick in the door on New Year's Eve.
Okay, so for the audience, super excited for this interview today. Please reference episode 33 with Joe Kirkland because you'll understand why soon here. But this is the first interview that I've done with a female federal agent, and I think you're going to find it very interesting. So with that being said, can you please introduce yourself for me?
Sure, Annie Kirkland.
And Annie, who did you work for?
I was with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Okay.
For 26 years.
And so for the episode that I just referenced, episode 33, how are you related to Joe?
He's my big brother.
Okay. I find it really, really fascinating. So let's just ask you just right away. He goes into DEA. He kind of gave me an idea of why he went into law enforcement. Why did you go into law enforcement?
It's funny. I don't know if they still do this, but in 8th grade, we were given an aptitude test. And for some reason, it said that I was well suited for law enforcement. So I went home and told my dad, and he said, well, if you're going to go into law enforcement, you should try and get into the FBI. Because at the time, he was with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and did undercover investigations with them. And he had just finished an investigation. He was working with an FBI agent. And so he brought that agent home a couple times to our home in Halton, Pennsylvania. And he just said, if you're going to go into law enforcement, you should go for the FBI.
So he ridiculed I don't want to say ridiculed, maybe that's a little strong, but he definitely was not happy when your brother told him he was going to go with DEA.
He was not.
So was there any other, and we're going to get into previous what you did before FBI, but was there any other federal agencies you thought about before FBI?
No, because my dad had actually worked as a fingerprint analyst for the FBI briefly in, I think it was 1947 that he was down in DC working as a fingerprint analyst. And then he ended up quitting there to join the Navy.
Okay. So he had a pretty big impact on you then.
Oh, yeah. He actually, I have a signed picture from J. Edgar Hoover addressed to my father on my desk, and I kept it on my desk my entire career.
Which I think is the same picture that Joe talked about, and he said that one got to go to you because you went to FBI and DEA.
Yeah, okay. And I had it on my desk my whole career.
That's funny.
Yeah, it was really neat.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your background. Tell me a little bit about growing up, where you grew up. Is Joe your only brother? Do you have other brothers and sisters? Sure. And, just tell me about your family life.
Yeah, I have 2 older sisters, and then Joe's my closest older sibling.
Okay.
So my oldest sister is a forester for the state of Pennsylvania, retired now. And my second oldest sister was a teacher in St. Mary's.
Okay.
But when we were young, my dad was in the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we moved from Delaware to Colorado to Missouri, all before I was 8. And then we ended up back in Pennsylvania because that's where my mom and dad were from.
Okay.
So, and my mom and dad had bought property, I think it was in 1972. And so my dad had gotten orders to Washington, D.C. in 1976. And back then, Washington, D.C. was a mess. And he had 4 kids. So he moved us to Pennsylvania. He had 2 weeks to move. He moved to Pennsylvania, built a 4-stall garage, and left my mom with 4 kids in a 4-stall garage with no running water. And we lived there for almost 2 years while my dad would come home on the weekends and build our house.
Okay, so how long did you live there without water then?
Boy, it was almost a year and a half.
Really?
Yeah, we had No, my dad rigged up like a gravity flow water system. So we had water that, like a hose that ran into the house, but we used an outhouse for almost a year and a half.
Well, so what year was that? I mean,
It was 76 to 78.
wow, so in the 70s.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay. So tell me a little bit, what'd your mom do?
She worked in a glass factory when we returned to Pennsylvania, but she was like a data entry back before when you had the computer cards that you punched, like punch cards. She would enter the data from the punch cards at hospitals and things like that.
Okay, so
But she had 4 kids, so it was always like part-time, and then we'd have to move and she'd have to relocate and get a job, a new job. And
yeah.
so it was pretty much a homemaker with odd jobs.
Were both of your parents, did they believe in education? Did they want you to go to college?
Oh yeah, I knew I was going to college when I was like 5 years old, because neither of my parents, my dad had tried to go to college and then ended up leaving Penn State to join the Navy and during Korea. And then he tried to go back, but with 4 kids, it was difficult. But I not only knew I was going to college, I knew I was going to Penn State. I knew the Penn State alma mater when I was like 5 years old.
Was there anything specifically that your parents wanted you to do, encouraged you? Not just you, but all your.
Sure. No, they pretty much let us choose what we wanted to do, but we knew we were going to college.
Okay.
And they were very generous and paid for our first 4 years. And then if you wanted to go on after that, like I went on to law school and I paid my own way in law school. But
Okay.
they were very generous because, with 4 kids, they put all 4 kids through college.
So what kind of kid were you? Rough and tumble? Were you studious? Were you into sports? I mean, give me an idea of how
Kind
you
of
were.
everything. I
Okay.
mean, growing up in a garage, you're pretty much rough and tumble. But I ran track and played basketball in high school. Basketball, not so well, but I was enthusiastic. So, but I was a pretty good runner. In fact, I ended up walking on to the track team at Penn State.
Oh, wow.
But they kept me on just because I kept showing up at practice. So not very accomplished.
So you were like the Rudy of Penn State
pretty
then.
much, yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so you end up going to college and you end up eventually getting your law degree. Why did you go that way?
Well, growing up, we had a neighbor, Dave Whitney, who was an attorney in town. And he was very kind to us kids because my dad was away a lot. And Dave would take us to the local road races. And he and his wife, Linda, were very close friends of ours. And I think he always, because he was an attorney, I think that's kind of why I went that route. And then also, I knew that the FBI hired attorneys. So
Okay, so that was going to be my question. Was the goal always to go into the FBI?
I think it was.
Okay.
I think it was. I remember my college roommate would laugh because I'd be like, "Hey, I've got to watch myself because I'm going to be an FBI agent."
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you become a deputy DA for who?
Assistant District Attorney for Clearfield County, which is pretty much in the dead center of Pennsylvania.
Okay, so what kind of cases are you working on?
Well, I worked, after about 6 months, I was the only full-time assistant DA in the office. We had 2 senior guys that worked part-time. Or three part-time, and even our assistant or our district attorney was part-time. So I was the only full-time assistant in the office within about 6 months. There was one senior guy that left about 6 months in, and then I was I did summary court, I did appellate work, I did trials. In fact, one of my first days on the job, I chose a jury.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what kind of cases were you working on?
The first trial I ever had was a bar fight where an individual, they'd gotten in a fight, and the one guy, they were friends, he hit his buddy over the head with a snow shovel. So things like that. Yeah. A lot of neighborhood disputes. that, that had escalated, and a lot of very rural. We had one homicide investigation in the year and a half I was there. And of course, the district attorney chose that. But
Wow.
yeah, and it was kind of an old school judge. And there was a funny story because my first trial, I was so nervous that I grabbed the podium and the podium started shaking. And I had to like reset and apologize to the jury. The judge was kind of laughing. And my boss said I won on sympathy votes because the jury felt bad for me. Yeah.
What did you like being an attorney?
I did. There's one other funny story I have to tell about the judge, because when I graduated from law school, I didn't have a lot of money, and my aunt bought me 2 pantsuits, a black pantsuit and a blue pantsuit. And so I showed up in court in a pantsuit, and the judge calls me up to his bench and said, "You are dressed inappropriately for my courtroom. In my courtroom, women do not wear pants." And so the only dresses I didn't have any dress suits, and the only dresses I had were from weddings that I had gone to. So the next day I had to go to court again, and I had to wear one of those dresses from a wedding. And the judge called me back up and asked if I was mocking him. And I said, "Your Honor, Central Pennsylvania at that time, there was no place to shop. You had to go to Pittsburgh so I said, "Your Honor, I promise over the weekend I will go shopping and we'll buy some appropriate attire. But if you don't want me to wear a pantsuit, this is all I've got." So,
wow.
Yeah.
So did you?
And that was in 91. No, 94.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you this once we get into your law enforcement career, but you're dealing with this judge. Did you have other interactions where it was a little, I guess, sexist for?
Well, yeah, there were only 2 female attorneys in the county at that time. And one was a relative of the district attorneys, and then myself. And they held the Bar Association meetings at the Elks Club. And at that time, the Elks Club wouldn't allow women into the bar area. So we sat at a table while the men went in and had the bar meeting. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
And I never really, at the time, like you just dealt with it.
Yeah.
And you didn't really think that much of it. You just, like, I never thought of ever taking steps because I was being discriminated against. You just dealt with it.
Okay, so let me ask you this
If
then.
that makes sense.
No, it does.
Yeah.
It does, totally. So when you get to the FBI throughout your career, do you ever have to deal with any of that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my first supervisor, when I went from New York out to Riverside, my first supervisor said to me, because I had just gotten married to an agent from Riverside, California. And so I got a transfer out there. And my first supervisor said to me, "I've never supervised a woman, and I didn't ask for you." And he said, "And I hope to God you don't plan on getting pregnant anytime soon, because I'm shorthanded the way it is." Yeah.
Okay, so you start with FBI in 97.
96.
96.
Yeah.
So I'm really fascinated by that, right? So not only does he say that you're his first woman, but you're in California, which is pretty progressive anyway,
Right.
even back then.
Right.
Okay, let me ask you this. When you went through the academy, how many female agents?
Boy, I was trying to think of that. I think there were 7 or 8, and we lost a couple. But
so it wasn't unusual to have female FBI agents at the time?
No. Because I think the first female agent was in 1972. But when I came in, I think there was still a disparity between the number of male and female agents.
But it's still fascinating that your first supervisor has that attitude.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like you would have thought, one, he would have at least supervised a female agent,
Right.
but at least come in contact with him before.
Yeah, you would think so.
Was
Because he had done time at headquarters. So,
Do you think he just didn't like females on the job?
I'm not really certain, because he actually became a very good, a proponent of mine.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
that was
but
going to be my question. Yeah.
initially, I had just gotten married
Okay.
and moved from New York to California. I'd never really been that far away from my family before. And so there was a lot of, we moved into a house that nobody had lived in since like 1956, no air conditioning. It was a lot of turmoil going on. Plus, I'm trying to settle into this new office and, wasn't really feeling welcome there because of the supervisor, not just the supervisor, but it was just a difficult transition. So I get out there, and about 3 weeks on the job, he calls me into the office and he said that he thought I was too timid for this line of work and I might want to reconsider my career choice.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I go up and talk to my training agent. And I'm like, and I'm just going to name him because he turned out to be a great friend of mine too, right?
Yeah.
And I said, Dawn, the supervisor's telling me I might not be cut out for this job. I'm like, where would he get that idea? And Dawn said, well, he and I had a conversation. And I shouldn't say this, but I said, you know what, Dawn, F you, and stormed out of the office, right? So about 3 weeks later, the supervisor calls me back into the office and he said, hey, you don't have to go out every day trying to prove me wrong. Because that lit a fire under me. And
Yeah.
I've since talked to Dawn about that. And he said, that's all it took for me to, the switch flipped and I was hell on wheels after that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay. So when you start with FBI in 96, how old are you?
I was 28.
28. Okay. So how old were you when you started as a DA assistant?
I would have been, was I 28? No, I wasn't 20. I think I was 26.
Okay.
26. Because I went straight out of college to law school.
Right.
And I graduated there. I was 23. So I guess I was like 25 or 26 when I joined the Bureau.
Do you think being an attorney and practicing law before you got to FBI helped you as an agent?
Oh, definitely.
Okay. In what way?
Well, the like drafting search warrants, I love doing that. And even like right before I retired, my boss called me in and he's like, these other agents had a case that they wanted to do a wire on. And my boss said, hey, we're going to do this wire, but I want you to write the warrant. So I wrote the warrant and had one of the other guys swear to it.
Yeah.
So, and I got really good. Once we got laptops, like the last couple years on the job, like we'd be out on surveillance and the boss would be like, hey, I need somebody to run back to the office and type a warrant. I said, boss, I have my laptop in the car, have the agent come over. We'd write up the warrant, call in, do a phone swear out, and be ready to go.
How about,
I love doing that.
Yeah. So how about
the paper? I really enjoyed.
How about this as your experience as an attorney? I'm assuming that as an attorney, you're interviewing witnesses and you're dealing with juries and everything else. Did that help you with communication skills?
I think without a doubt.
Okay.
Without a doubt.
Okay.
So.
All right. So you get to the academy in 96 then.
96,
FBI.
April 96.
You're 26 years old. Give me your experience at the FBI Academy.
Well, it was funny because I had worked real closely with some state troopers and they had scared the death out of me about the academy because theirs was very militaristic and if you didn't cut it, you were going to get dropped. So I went in there with that expectation and I loved the academy because I was making like $26,000 a year as a assistant DA. So I was one of the few people that got a pay raise by going to the academy. And I'm thinking, I'm getting free food. This is awesome. I'm able to work out. I really enjoyed the academy experience.
For an FBI agent, how many weeks, they might have changed this, but for you, how many weeks were you there?
You know, I can't really say. I think it was only like 15. And then at some point they increased it to 20. And I don't really know what it is now.
Okay.
How many weeks?
So I know as a DEA agent what topics that I covered. What did you cover?
Well, we had course, firearms, practical applications, physical fitness, and our PT guy was a former HRT member, and that guy could do push-ups like you would not believe.
Okay, so for
He
the
was great.
for the audience, tell them what HRT is.
Oh, I'm sorry, hostage rescue team.
Okay.
They're like the elite SWAT members of the FBI.
And they're a national. They're not just a local group. They are
No,
specifically.
they're national and international as well.
Oh, okay.
So, but they're based out of Quantico.
Okay.
They're like the special forces for the FBI.
And they really have to go through a rigorous to try and get on that team.
Rigorous. And a couple of our instructors were former HRT members.
Yeah.
And the one individual that had a huge impact on me, Bill Belinsky, he was a former Pennsylvania law enforcement officer and then had gone HRT, and just an awesome guy. He was one of our really good instructors, a practical application instructor.
So, but
one of those guys who had little sayings that stuck with you your whole career.
Yeah.
That we probably shouldn't put on camera.
You can say whatever you want.
Yeah.
We'll edit it out if it need be. So as a DEA guy, we have a lot of drug identification. We're working specifically on drug stuff. So you guys have a whole plethora of stuff you study in. So
Yes.
what do you focus on at the Academy for FBI?
Well, there's they have a lot of stress communications and writing, search warrants, the legal section, and at that time we had the MIOG. It was a manual of investigative operations, and they focused a lot on that, which is funny because it's since gone away. So, but back then they actually had a guide for all the different operations and what steps you should take for what type of investigations, and they focused a lot on that.
So we were talking a little bit about this beforehand. Was there anything at the FBI Academy for an FBI agent that you guys could get bounced out for?
Well, we had people bounced out for firearms.
Okay.
A lot of the females at that time, they had a trigger pull, pull test. I don't know if you had something
we did.
similar.
Yep.
But I forget how many times you had to pull the trigger in a minute or something like that. So we lost a couple women on that. There was like a incident with a couple new agent trainees that had gone into town and had gotten inebriated, and those guys got bounced out. So I think altogether we lost probably 7 or 8 people right off the bat. And then if you didn't get cut right off the bat, they had, I was surprised because they had like a remedial PT. Like I showed up in shape because I was scared to death I was going to get bounced every day.
Yeah.
In fact, our class counselor, his name was Stan Lecter, and we started calling him Hannibal Lecter because every time you walked in the room, somebody would disappear. So
wow.
Yeah. But they had like a remedial PT that they would send people to if they didn't pass the first fit test. And you had 3 chances to pass the fit test.
But it's interesting to me because you come in with the same attitude that I come in with, which is, look, you've got plenty of time to get ready. So what I found it ludicrous that people would show up and couldn't pass
to me, those people should have been bounced right away. Because to me, that showed a lack of, just a lack of preparation and a lack of motivation that's probably going to haunt those people for the rest of their career.
Yeah.
So, and they've since relaxed a lot of the PT requirements and things, which I think is terrible because it's a big part of the job.
Well, not only, I don't know how
it's a safety issue to me.
Well, and I don't know if you know this. So for FBI, for your firearms course, have they changed it over the years?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because they did the same thing for us, and I thought it was stupid.
Yeah,
just absolutely.
all the time.
Okay.
In fact, at one time we went, typically it's 50 rounds because there's 50 rounds in a box. So it was 50 rounds. Then it went up to like 64 rounds. And it's like, what do you do? Like, I know there's some explanation for every change that they make, and
Yeah.
I think now the course that they run is very good because there's a lot of close up shooting, a
Mhm.
lot of shooting from the holster, moving and shooting, which is all things that I think should be incorporated.
Yeah. So back in the day for you guys, did you have to shoot from the 50 as well?
We did,
Okay.
yeah, the
Okay.
50
So good. The same thing that we had to
behind a
do.
barricade,
Yeah.
yeah, which was just a post,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I can ask you this because I've interviewed Joe and I've interviewed a whole bunch of DEA guys, and I can joke about this a little bit, I think, with you. Tell me how you thought the difference between being an FBI agent at the academy was being at the DEA. Did you see the difference?
Oh yeah. In fact, at first I thought I'd made a mistake because the DEA training seemed a lot more militaristic,
Mm-hmm.
which I think I would have enjoyed. But the opportunities for FBI to go into different investigative programs,
Right.
and I had seen Joe kind of struggle with transfers and getting transfers, and it's a lot easier in the FBI to get transferred. Like you can take a voluntary transfer to, say, a hardship office, and then your chances of moving from there are expanded, all with the FBI, where I don't think DEA had those options. But at the academy, there was a big difference between DEA guys and FBI,
Okay.
I
So
thought.
yeah. So for FBI, explain to me how do you choose your office? Do they choose for you? Do you get a wish
Oh,
list? How does
yeah.
it work?
Well, you get a wish list.
But it's a wish list.
Oh, yeah, you can. Well, now, and this is one thing that agents I don't think realize, but now they do a much better job of trying to get you where you want to go.
Mm.
But we had to list the offices from 1 to 56, and I got my 56 choice, New York City. I wanted to come west, anywhere west, like Colorado, Idaho, that Montana. I had listed all of them, like 1 through 10, and I got sent to New York City. And that was traumatic for me. And I actually, they videotape you get in your orders. And I actually swore on that videotape because I opened that and I thought I had royally screwed up. And the PT instructor and Bill Belinsky pulled me aside because they were all there and pulled me aside and kind of got me calmed down. But
Does it typically, this is the way I've heard it, I don't know if this is true for FBI, does it typically work that they want you to start in a big office, then you can go to a medium office, and then ultimately how you start your career or end your career, you can go wherever you want?
they did that after, they implemented that after I got in.
Okay.
So now I think they send agents to a small office and then a large office, or they send you to a large office and then send you to a small office.
Okay. Because I didn't
And
think.
they were doing that for a while, but now I think they've done away with that because the cost just became too. I mean, that's a huge cost to send an agent. Like we had new agents that came to Alaska
Mhm.
or Anchorage when I was there, and then after 3 to 5 years, they'd get transferred out, and that's a huge expense for the government.
Wow. So after 3 years, I didn't think the idea itself was too bad where you start off in a really major office and kind of learn how things really
Right,
work.
right. The only thing is, we always joke that in the large offices, it's easy to hide.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. When you're at the academy, do you have any sense of what kind of cases you want to work on?
Well, I knew right off the bat, all I wanted to do was violent crime.
Oh.
Like that's the whole reason I went into the FBI.
Why? What?
I'm not sure. I think like during law school, the criminal law was what I was drawn to, and I don't know. That was always kind of my focus.
So you get out of the academy, you're assigned to New York. What is the first group you're in?
Well, when you first get to New York, they put you on the applicant squad. And so you're doing all the background investigations for, like, my first interview in New York was actually at the World Trade Center for a federal judge. like doing the background investigations for federal judges, political appointees,
Huh.
assistant U.S. attorneys. It was, and then also the reinvestigations for the senior agents. So they had 2 applicant squads in New York, and you got assigned as a new agent to one of them.
Do you at that point do you realize it's that coming, or do you
No,
say
I didn't know, like, I didn't know how that worked. So we just got assigned to the applicant squad. And then, like, anytime there was a big operation, the squads would come to the applicant squad and tell the supervisor, hey, we need 6 new agents for this search, 6 new agents for that search. So I volunteered for everything because I figured that's the way you probably would get where you wanted to go.
yeah?
So,
So
but then after the applicant squad, then they send you out to the surveillance squads. And I got sent out to a surveillance squad. It was to be a 2-week rotation, but the team leader liked me, so I ended up being out there for a year.
Okay, so tell me what the surveillance group is all about, because we talked about this beforehand. With DEA, when I needed to do surveillance, I did surveillance. But
Sure.
you guys, first of all, you're a bigger agency,
Right.
bigger budget, and you guys have really specific units that I think is super helpful. So tell me what the surveillance group
Well,
is.
in New York, and as I mentioned to you earlier, this was only in the larger offices. They have surveillance groups, and there's agent surveillance groups that do like the surveillance on violent crime cases and help the agents out with that. And then there's unarmed surveillance groups that do a lot of like the counterintelligence type surveillance. And I think only Washington, LA, and New York had the surveillance squads. But it was full time. That's all we did was surveillance. And so we followed a lot of Russian mob guys around and organized crime. And you try and get pictures of, it was a lot like what you see on TV.
Yeah, it seems like a fun job.
Oh, it was fun. It was fun.
Tell the audience, I mean, how was it doing your first surveillance in New York?
Oh my goodness. New York was like a movie set to me because I'd never been to a big city before. The biggest city I'd ever been in was Pittsburgh. And so I had a stick shift pickup truck with no air conditioning when I got sent to New York City. It was eye-opening for a country kid.
And I got to imagine, because you don't have any GPS, you don't have any phones in.
No, you had a map book.
Yeah, the Thomas
Yeah.
Guide, right?
Yeah. And they find a place to live. They send this old agent down from New York, and that's basically what he gives you, is a map of the city saying, good luck, kid, to find a place. So luckily, I had a friend who was a class ahead of me, and so I ended up rooming with her in New Jersey. But surveillance in New York was eye-opening. The one night, it's the middle of the night, we're in Jersey City, which I don't know if you're familiar, but it's not a great location. And my team leader had blackout limo tint on his car, and he's sitting in his car, and he's like, hey, could a couple of you guys come over? Because there's some kids trying to jack open my trunk, as he's sitting in his car.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Do you get, when you start, I'm assuming that maybe you're not so great at surveillance, but then you got to be, you turn out great if you're doing it every single day.
Oh, yeah, you get really good at it. I learned a lot on surveillance about how to do investigations.
Really?
You'd be working with the case agent, and he'd be telling you what he needed on surveillance to support his case, and then you'd go out and try and do that. And it was a lot of fun. And a lot of high-speed driving in downtown Manhattan, which was fun.
How is there any training that they have you go through, or is just kind of learn on the job? You just
they
go.
Pretty much throw you in a car. And in fact, even with investigations, so then I get out to California, and they hand you a stack of files, and it's pretty much go to it. So you're just trying to figure things out.
Okay, so tell me about that. So you go from New York to Los Angeles. Do you want to go there?
Well, my funny explanation is that I got married to get out of New York, and I got divorced to get out of LA. But
Okay.
there's more to it than that.
Sure.
But that's basically, I got married to an agent that was stationed out in Riverside, California. So I went to an ASAC, and my team leader from the surveillance group went to the ASAC on my behalf. And my supervisor up in New York, Lee Wetzel, was his name, and he went to bat for me, and I was able to get a voluntary transfer out to LA on my own dime
Okay.
because I had gotten married, so
Okay.
I got out there.
So are you assigned to the LA field division? Are you in the Riverside office?
I'm in Riverside.
You're in Riverside.
Which is a resident agency out of LA.
Okay. So how many groups, FBI groups,
There
are in
were
Riverside at the time?
two groups there at the time, a white collar investigation
Okay.
and then a violent crime squad.
Do you get to the
I
violent
got
squad?
in the violent crime squad.
Okay, so what kind of cases do you get to work then?
Oh, it was awesome. I did kidnappings, extortions, bank robberies were rampant out in the late 90s in LA. We had one day, in one day you could respond to 3 different bank robberies.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was a lot of fun. But I was on the fugitive squad, so we did warrant work. The marshals have kind of taken that over now, but back then we had a fugitive task force, and I was assigned to the task force. So you get warrants, work them up, and go out and make arrests. It was a lot of fun.
So one of the things that you worked on a lot, not only in Los Angeles but later on in your career, was crimes against children. Did that ever become like a specialty for you?
It wasn't really a specialty, but and I'd like to talk to that because one of the first cases I got out there, I told you they handed you like a bunch of old dog cases, and this guy had been on the run from a local child molest warrant for years. And I go down through the file and see that they had interviewed a friend of his in Las Vegas like 7 years earlier. And so I call that guy in Vegas and I'm asking if he's had any contact. And he's like, yeah, I have a phone number for the guy. So I was able to work up that phone number and found the guy in West Arkansas living under a different name. And that was one of the first investigations that I worked. But he was a child molest suspect. And then the other big case that impacted me is I got out there in June of 97. And in April of that year, a little boy, Anthony Michael Martinez, had been abducted from Beaumont, California, which was in our area. And it was a straight up, was playing with a bunch of his friends, including his little brother, who was 6, in an alley behind their house. And a guy pulled up and wanted their help looking for a kitten. And he grabbed Anthony's little brother, and Anthony fought to get his brother free, and the guy grabbed Anthony instead. And at the time, another agent had the investigation, but I would help him out occasionally when he asked for it. And then when that agent left, I ended up inheriting that case. And all we had, Anthony was found 10 days later deceased. And all we had was a partial thumbprint from a piece of duct tape on Anthony's body. And it was the kind where, I don't know if DEA, remember the major case prints where you had to go that extra step. Mm-hmm. So that's the piece we had. So we would go out and scoop up these child molesters or child predators and roll them for major prints, trying to find a match with that that print. And the sheriff that had the investigation at the local level was a guy by the name of Walt Watkins. And he looked like he had just stepped out of a Marlboro commercial, like long, like gray hair, big gray mustache. He wore his pro bull riding satin jacket everywhere. And he and I ended up down in LA, like Hollywood and that area where a lot of these sexual offenders were, interviewing all these sexual offenders in the middle of the night, and there's Walt looking like we're in downtown West Hollywood, and there's Walt looking like he stepped out of a Marlboro commercial. Funny guy. There's some funny stories I can't tell on camera about Walt, but he was a neat guy. But so anyway, that case impacted me a lot because I don't know, there's just something about the kid cases that they just get a hold of you and you can't let go. And so fast forward, I'm back at headquarters in 2005, and I get a call from one of the agents in Riverside. And I'm not sure if you remember, but the Joseph Duncan.
Yeah.
He's the guy that killed the family up in Montana. I think it was Montana or Idaho. And then kidnapped the little girl and killed her little brother. Well, it turns out that guy is the one that kidnapped Anthony. Duncan.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I totally missed that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I knew all about what had happened in Idaho. I didn't know. Yeah.
They matched his print, and then he ended up confessing to it.
Wow.
But that case was big, and then there was another one. So they would send you to this. I worked a lot of child pornography cases too back then, when I was out in LA, and they would send you to this Crimes Against Children conference that Dallas PD put on, and a mother of a little girl that had been abducted. The little girl's name was Morgan Nick, and it's ironic because I was at that conference in like 1998, and Morgan was abducted in Arkansas in 1995. And her mother came and spoke to the investigators. And it was one of the most powerful experiences of my life because this mom talked about when Morgan comes home. Like her little girl had been gone for 3 years, and it was all when Morgan comes home. Morgan likes to do this. This is Morgan's favorite color. And there was not a dry eye in that conference room. And these were seasoned sex crimes investigators and not a dry eye in there. And they just solved that case in last year.
Really?
Yep, they ended up getting a DNA hit on a fella that had died in prison.
Wow.
Yeah, but that just kind of stuck with me, those two experiences, and I really gravitated towards the Crimes Against Children cases.
So you're working on the Crimes Against Children, you're working on a little bit the pornography stuff and everything else. Did it get to you?
Oh, yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Well, it's funny because, not funny, but so the November of 2021, we get involved in now I'm in Philadelphia, and this case, a mom killed her 4-year-old and 6-year-old and buried him in the shed behind their house. And we ended up, our evidence response team ended up helping out the local agency up there because it was a small agency in like eastern Pennsylvania. And so we went in and we were instrumental in the body recovery of those 2 little girls. But they haunt you, those cases.
Does FBI, are they giving you counseling for dealing with those kind of cases?
They sent, after that one, that case really shook me up. And they have a critical incident like support conference that they sent actually my husband and I to. But my husband and I, there was a little boy involved as well, and he ended up surviving. And my husband and I actually tried to adopt that little boy, and it didn't work out. He's placed with another family and doing really well. But that's how strongly I felt about that case. So that was something.
I don't know how this is for FBI, and I don't know how it is for other investigative agencies of crimes against children. Does the FBI, do they ever limit going, look, guys, you can only work these type of cases for 2 years, and we got to get you out?
No, the thing with those cases is like at one point I asked my boss, I'm like, hey, I need to get out of this. And now they're very receptive to that. But back then, my boss at the time, nobody else wanted to do it. And that's the other thing, you feel kind of driven to do those investigations because a lot of people struggle with being able to handle doing those investigations. So if you're able to handle it, you kind of feel like it's your responsibility almost to do those cases, if that makes sense.
It does. So I've talked to other female detectives who have handled those type of cases, and it was almost like the guys never wanted to deal with that.
Yeah, the guys in the office did not want
So
to deal with
you kind of felt that same way then.
Right, right. Yeah, they didn't want to deal with it, and I'm like, I don't know, like with kids, man, it just you feel driven to help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, extra driven, really.
Well, we had one more case that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
That was kind of cool. This is Philly too, in Philadelphia. So it was like that week between Christmas and New Year's, and my buddy had taken some time off, and he was the duty agent, so I had to cover a duty call for him, and it was right after. What was it was after Nashville, the explosion in Nashville. Okay. And so there had been some chemical shipment up to this small town in coal country in north of Allentown. And so I ran up there just to run down these chemicals, and it turned out they were for tanning leather or something like that. But it took the whole day to run it down. So I'm hanging out in the police department, and there's a flyer of a little girl with pink hair and that she's missing. So I start talking to the detective, and she comes from kind of a troubled background, and the detective's like, yeah, she's been missing since the beginning of December. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's something we could probably help you out with. And he's like, really? I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what the FBI does. If a kid's missing, we can help you out with it, but you have to be kind of respectful when you're offering assistance to local departments, as I'm sure you're aware of, because they're not always receptive, and you don't want to come in acting like you want to take over. So you just got to be very respectful when you're offering assistance. So I did that, and I'm like, hey, do you mind if I talk to the dad? And he's like, well, I'm waiting for some phone records from the father. And so with his blessing, I reach out to the father, and the father's like, yeah, I'm waiting on these records from AT&T. I said, bud, your daughter's been missing since for 3 weeks. I said, I'd drive down to the AT&T office and get the damn records. Yeah. And so he gets them to me within like half an hour. And I identify this number, and by this time it's New Year's Eve. Yeah, it's New Year's Eve because it was in between. It's like 2 days later. And I call my boss and I said, hey, I got this number. It's ringing out in Kansas City or pinging out there. I'd like to call out there. I just want to keep you apprised. He's like, good luck getting anybody on New Year's Eve to go out and run down that number, which is right. Everybody's off, right? So I call out to Kansas City and get this awesome supervisor. He's like, are you kidding me? I've got 15 task force officers that would love to make double overtime. So they go out and they kick in the door. The guy's 25. He met this little girl on the internet and had taken her out to Kansas City. And they kick in the door on New Year's Eve. And then they interview the kid, and you have to take the kid to like...
Kid's still alive then?
The kid's still alive, yeah. She's 13. And so they recover the child, and they're interviewing her, and they do like a child forensic interview. So it's individuals that are very adept at interviewing kids. And they're talking to her all about the kid the individual that she was with out in Kansas City. And at the end, the interviewer leaves, and to get her a bottle of water, comes back, and the kid's like, oh, by the way, I'm also having sex with this 40-year-old that comes down from Connecticut. Like just boom. And so they send me that information, and we're able to get that guy identified. And we go up to Connecticut, serve a search warrant on his house, and recover all kinds of evidence. And they were talking via Snapchat. And so I never dealt with Snapchat before, and I talked to a more experienced agent in the office that's done a lot of like Snapchat investigating. And he's like, huh, good luck getting anything from them. So we do a search warrant to Snapchat and get a big data dump back that makes no sense whatsoever. And I have to go through like 10,000 Snapchat messages and put them in order by date so that you can make sense of, because Snapchat isn't real law enforcement friendly. They'll
No.
give you the information, but they give you a dump. So I had to marry all that up. And from that, we were able to prove that that guy had come down to Connecticut, from Connecticut to Pennsylvania 5 times, taken the kid up to Connecticut with him for weekends, and that he had had her make videos for him, pornographic videos, and we were able to charge him with that. And he just got sentenced to 17 years.
So on the one hand, it's got to be horrific work in these cases, but when you do something like that, how satisfying is that?
It's satisfying, but the thing is, that kid's always going to be a mess.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the heartbreaking part. Like, I've worked other cases. I actually worked the first case where a lesbian teacher from North Carolina flew out to California to meet a 16-year-old. And it's satisfying to arrest those individuals, but those kids are never going to be quite right.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
which is heartbreaking.
What's baffling about the case is she's missing for 3 weeks, and dad's like, and she's not dead. You
Yeah.
actually find her alive. And it's
Yeah.
like, man, you could have.
Well, and it's almost like you have to provide parental advice to these parents, which is crazy because I don't even have kids myself. Because that father called me and he's like, well, what should I be doing? And I said, Bud, if it were my daughter, I'd be halfway to Kansas City by now. Like, you know, she's out there. You know she's going to be recovered. Get your butt out there.
But you know, on the not talking about the dad now, but and you know, I don't want to disparage any law enforcement, but the other thing is, if you have this, why isn't law enforcement getting the records as quickly? Because if it would have been my case,
right,
so I'm subpoenaing the records immediately.
Yeah.
I want that stuff.
I think and nothing against that local law
Yeah.
enforcement,
Huh.
but I think a lot of these smaller departments, like in Pennsylvania, like in California, they have large sheriff's offices that cover each county.
Right.
But in Pennsylvania, you have small towns with 2 or 3 officers, including the chief, and just the opportunity for training and the funding for training is lacking. And, you know, they're just trying to keep their head above water with all the cases that they have coming in, that I think a lot, they don't have the luxury of having the investigative weapons or time or resource to dig deeply into a lot of investigations.
How lucky or fortunate it is, just on a chance,
It
that
was
you happen to
a
see that.
chance. And the fact that I honest to God think that there was a higher power involved in that, because, you know, 9 times out of 10, you'd walk into that department and that picture never would have caught your eye.
Yeah.
Or you wouldn't have had time to, like, we were sitting there and I had time to look around and notice a flyer and start asking questions. And it was just, we were lucky.
You mentioned this, and I wanted to come back to this. I think it's very interesting. So tell me your experience as an FBI agent during your career. Exactly what you were saying. You go into maybe a large department, maybe a small department, and you have to you want to help, but you have to go in
Oh,
going,
yeah,
we're
you
not
have
going
to
to take
be-
over.
Right.
Did people, were they very resistant to FBI coming in like that?
You know, it depended. It depended on your approach. Like we had, over the course of my career, you always ran into a little bit of resistance, but you could overcome it. Like if you're a good person and take the right approach, you're going to make inroads
Right.
with people. I mean, you just, like we went to, the one time we went to training down in Dallas, and these Dallas PD guys, it was mostly FBI, 2 Dallas PD detectives, right? And they're like kind of standoffish. And finally, I just went over. We were having beers one night. Hey, how's it going? I'm so and so. I'm from LA. And they had had a bad experience with an FBI agent like 15 years earlier. And I knew the agent that they had because that agent ended up transferring to LA. And they're like bitching about this person. And I'm like, you know what? We don't really like her either, you know? And then they were like, really? I'm like, yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but you could, and the other, so I took a National Academy class through in 2004. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but
I am. I mean,
it's
that's
like
yeah.
chiefs and upper management from departments across the world come to that National Academy. And I was a counselor for one of the classes. And same thing, there was a former Chicago superintendent. I mean, big, rough guy. And he and I are good friends now, but he would stand out in the parking lot and he was kind of anti-FBI, and he'd stand out in the parking lot drinking beer. So then one day I'm like, I bought a case of Miller Lite, took it over and said, hey, Jim, what's going on? You know, I know you had some problems with the Bureau. Tell me about it, right? And he, and now he tells me I'm the only agent he's ever told that he's loved. So, because we're still good friends.
But Annie,
But all it takes is reaching out, finding what the problem is, and working it out.
yeah, so tell the audience what the FBI National Academy is, because for me, if done right by the FBI, I can't imagine a better liaison program for national and maybe even international.
It's amazing. Like we, so they come in from all over the country, and it's basically they can earn courses, college courses, credits towards their master's degree. And it's almost become like a rite of passage if you want to become a chief
Yeah.
or rise to a certain level in different departments. And it's an amazing experience that I don't think the FBI offices supported enough. Like I volunteered to go back there as a counselor, but a lot of times they have to like volunteer people that they need to go back there for counselors. If you know what I mean.
Oh yeah.
Because for me it was easy. I didn't have kids. I was going through a divorce at the time, so it was perfect timing. But it's a big disruption to your family life to commit to going back there for 3 months at a time.
Yeah.
So, and it runs, ours ran from September to December, but it's an amazing experience. You basically get paid to work out with the guys. I'd take them to medical appointments, and I made some lifelong friends. And like, it's also a good opportunity if you're looking for a career after the FBI. I know a couple of the counselors were on the verge of retirement and had come back to make connections and things. But I've got a handful of friends from there that we meet up, you know, once or twice a year. And we, unfortunately, one of the main guys that kind of kept us all together, Dave Waller, passed away a year ago, but of brain cancer. But he was kind of the glue that kept us together. But there's and in that group there's a guy from Scotland, a guy from New Zealand.
Yeah.
But it's like a lifelong. I got to go over to Finland, and I'm walking down the hallway, and there's a National Academy symbol in the one guy's office, and I stopped, and he ended up inviting us over to his house for dinner, and it's like a huge international fraternity.
Yeah, I mean, again, I can't imagine a better liaison thing specifically for the FBI. And if you have good FBI representatives,
If you do, yeah.
it'd be great.
Now we had one of my friends who's was a lieutenant with UCLA PD. He came back to the class after mine, and you're right. It's all dependent on the counselors that you had, because I don't think he had near as much. He didn't enjoy his experience near as much as he would have if he would have been in our class.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of fun.
Okay, so one thing I want to talk to you about. So you talked about the surveillance team. And as I mentioned before, when I was at DEA, if I had to do surveillance, I did it myself. I didn't have teams. But you guys are pretty unique where you have different specialty units. So tell me and tell the audience what an ERT team is.
Okay, so that's an evidence response team, and
Okay.
each of the 40 field offices has, or 56 field offices has a 40-man. Some of the smaller offices struggle to fill it, but they're to have a 40-man ERT team. And what we do is, if there's a crime scene, we'll go out and work with the locals to process crime scenes. So for me, of course, TWA 800 crashed while we were in the academy, and then I got sent to New York, and that had a big impact on me because a lot of the new agents got pulled in to run down leads from TWA 800, the crash off of Long Island. And they had reconstructed the plane in a hangar out on Long Island. And we'd have to, as a new agent, you'd get assigned out there to help put pieces together and help the evidence response team process pieces of the airplane and things like that. And that had a big impact on me. So I knew I wanted to join the evidence response team. And there was also, it was amazing because we got sent, as a new agent, I got sent to assist with processing a crime scene where an individual had been killed with a circular saw. They thought he had been cut up in this basement with a circular saw, and it had been an FBI informant. And so 10 years in the Bronx, it was like garbage, hip deep garbage in this basement of this huge apartment building. And we were working with the evidence response team guys clearing out that garbage. And we ended up finding a blade from a circular saw with blood on it.
Wow.
Yeah, 10 years after the fact. And I knew right then, it was before CSI and all that stuff exploded on television. But that experience, I knew right then that I wanted to get on that evidence response team.
So is the evidence response team also people who would go out, like, for example, I'd go out and do a search warrant. I have all this paperwork, and they would go through and scan it and analyze it. Or is that a separate unit?
That's a separate unit.
Man, you guys have everything.
Yeah, that's a unit from headquarters that'll come out and do that.
Okay.
For the big, like, paper dump warrants.
Yeah.
But ours was more like, well, for instance, when I got out to California, I joined the evidence response team in 1998. And then I think it was maybe January 2000, that Alaska air crash off of Port Hueneme in California. There were 88 people killed. And we went out and did the body recovery because that local, I think it was for Ventura County, their morgue was just overwhelmed with that many victims. So we actually went out on Coast Guard ships, and it was, I mean, it sounds weird to say that it was a good experience. You know, I guess that's black humor from law enforcement. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
we went out on on these Coast Guard ships, and they had the roving vehicle that they used to find the Titanic. They brought that out and dropped it down to the floor of the ocean because the plane was so deep. And they had that little robot like plucking bodies out of the water and out of the wreckage. And they put them in what looked like a shark cage. And it took 8 hours to fill the cage, bring it up to the top onto the ship, and then we would pull those bodies out and put them into body bags.
That can't be fun.
You know, it wasn't. It wasn't at all, and it was a horrible experience. And that was January, and I'm in Southern California, and like afterwards, tongue is really big out there in California, right?
Yeah.
And so I was walking through the grocery store, and I just ended up heaving in the grocery store. And I ran out of there so embarrassed. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm pregnant. Like, I just made something up, because I'm like, how do you explain to a guy that heap of tongue looks a lot like what we just put in body bags? And I'm sorry, I just puked all over your floor. Like, it was terrible, terrible. And you don't like at that critical incident, they send you to critical incident now, like a debriefing after every one of those incidents. But like law enforcement, you know, you're in those groups, you're not getting,
right.
You know, people aren't talking about.
Yeah.
You just kind of deal with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And but yeah, that was really cool. And we got to go to the consulate bombing in Karachi shortly after 9/11. There was a car bomb, and they bombed the U.S. consulate in Pakistan. And I mean, here I am, a small town kid from Western Pennsylvania in Karachi. You know, I mean, I just had some opportunities that I never would have had.
Yeah, just a fascinating, fascinating career.
Yeah.
So with the ERT, you said that you worked the Pentagon and 9/11.
Yeah.
What did you do?
Well, we went to the Pentagon first, and I think we got there like the 21st of September. And that was a story too, because we took a team of like, I forget, like 12 or 15 people from LA. And of course, I'm in LA, so we're 3 hours behind. And 9/11 happens. My mom calls me. I'm on the phone with her watching the second plane go into the tower. And I'm like, I've got to go. And I went out the door to go to the office. And then I'm like 100 yards out of the driveway. And I'm like, damn, I better pack a bag. And we packed a bag, and we basically lived in the office for like the 3 or 4 months after 9/11. But then they're going to send this team to the Pentagon, and we're on a double-decker plane. And I said to the team leader, I'm not getting on that plane unless we can see the cockpit. Like, I'm just not getting on the plane. And a bunch of the other guys are like, yeah, we're not getting on there either. And the stewardess the person that was checking us in was like, well, that's first class, blah, blah, blah. You're not getting on first class, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, we're not going. And the pilot comes, and my team leader's trying to talk me down. I'm like, Dave, I'm not getting on that plane, and you shouldn't either unless we have armed guys watching the cockpit. And finally, the pilot comes, and he's like, hey, what's going on? And I explained to him the situation, and he tells the girl, bump him up to first class. He's like, I want him up there too. So we go to the Pentagon, and it's a crazy experience because they have like machine gun emplacements, like air support. There's jets flying over, like military jets. It was like something out of a movie. But what they would do is they would bring the debris out of the Pentagon and dump it with large machinery in the Pentagon parking lot. And then we'd go through it by hand looking for body fragments and paperwork, anything from the plane, and we'd separate all that out so that we could go through it more carefully.
I don't know why I always just assumed that it was NTSB who was putting those things together and not you guys.
What's crazy is we work really closely with NTSB, but they don't have the manpower. And that's the one thing the FBI brings is the manpower. So there's like a memo of understanding with NTSB that FBI ERT will support them.
So tell
So
me,
just about every plane crash, we go out and assist.
so you had mentioned that you also worked 9/11. What did you do in New York?
So in New York, so then we went to New York in February of 2022 at the tail end of everything. And there we were working out at the Fresh Kills dump. Same thing. They would bring debris out. And there they had it on, they'd put it on like a conveyor belt. And I think they're typically used like for gold mining and things like that, where it shakes the debris. And so they would dump the debris, we would shovel it onto the conveyor belt. And again, we were searching for body fragments and paperwork. And we were still finding body parts in February after, 5 months later.
So Andy, that's interesting because you're not at ground zero. You're
No.
working at a dump site, but you had mentioned to me that you're still having kind of like sniffling allergies from working on that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating to me because you have all these guys that have died from working the ground zero.
We've lost 26 agents.
I did not know that.
Mostly evidence response team members.
Wow.
Yeah. And again, as law enforcement, you could sign up for there's a 9/11 compensation program where they provide health benefits. But right after 9/11, everybody was like, we don't need that. And then I had a assistant section chief at headquarters, and he was my assistant section chief when I was in the special events management unit. Very nice man. And he worked out at the FBI gym, and so did I. So we knew each other, friendly that way, even though he was my assistant section chief. And we talked down at the gym and things. And he came in one day with had pulled a muscle in his hip. And this was like in 2004 or 5 when I was down at headquarters. Well, here it turned out he was full of cancer. And he passed away in like 2005. But it wasn't until like probably maybe 5 or 6 years ago that they started recognizing all these different cancers that evidence response team members had come, I don't know how, had been diagnosed with as being related to 9/11. And now all those, there's 26 people that they've linked their deaths to 9/11.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Even all these years later,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah. No, I know. I mean, that's, John Stewart was talking about all those NYPD guys and NYFD guys, but I didn't even think about you guys being out.
Yeah. And now they've also extended those benefits to people who even resided in the area.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on a little bit. So, do you promote? It's how does it
I
work?
did.
Because it's like supervisor. You guys have a weird thing
Yeah.
because I don't think you guys are called group supervisor. You guys are called
it's supervisory special agents.
Okay, so why did you promote?
Well, I was trying to get back east to where my parents were.
Okay.
And so when I took that class through the National Academy, I started putting in for jobs at our headquarters, and I became a supervisor at the Special Events Management Unit.
Okay, and what were you doing there at the Special Events Management?
We coordinated FBI support at different special events, like the World Series, all the security functions for.
Did you
the
get to
FBI.
go to those?
I did. I actually got to go to the Olympics in Torino for a month. Yeah. I got to go to Helsinki to the World Track.
You have had a
Field
good
Championships.
gig.
That was a very good. I really enjoyed that assignment. The Little League World Series. But now most of that you're working in the command post, but even still it was a great experience.
Before I forget, you were a behavioral analysis coordinator not only in Philadelphia but in
LA.
LA.
Yeah.
What does that consist of?
So we have It's commonly known as a profiling unit, but it's a
Okay.
behavioral analysis unit. And so we would gather local cases, usually unsolved homicides or serial rape cases from local departments, and send those back to the behavioral analysis unit. They'd review the case materials and then come out with investigative suggestions for the local
Okay, so those are the guys that are featured in, I think the book is called Manhunter.
Mindhunter.
Mindhunter.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. There's different viewpoints of the individual in that book. But
Well, I'm just talking about the work
Right.
in general, right?
oh,
Because
it was amazing.
yeah,
Very, very intelligent individuals back there.
because what they're doing is you're sending them the information and then they're going, hey, we think it's a white male 30. I mean, how do they?
Well, that's how it comes out on TV, and
Yeah.
but basically what it is you have a set of investigative experts back at that behavioral analysis unit, and they have seen other cases where investigative techniques work or things that, so you have like 15 individuals looking at a case that probably one investigator's looked at, and they're basically going through and just finding either investigative steps that the investigator might have missed, or they're looking at techniques that have worked in other investigations that are applicable to your investigation. And then they also, like, we worked a case very closely with Riverside Police Department, and in that case a mother and 3-year-old daughter had been allegedly kidnapped from their home and found in a vehicle like a mile and a half from the residence. And so I worked very closely with the behavioral analysis unit, and they were basically giving media strategies like what you should release when, and what should be placed on flyers that they've seen work in the past, and invest or interview strategies for the subject. And it ended up that the husband had staged the whole thing to look like a kidnapping, and with the assistance of the behavioral analysis unit and their investigative and interview strategies, that guy's now on death row out in California.
Wow.
But so it's cases like that. It was they're very, very good at looking at investigations that may have run cold and coming up with different strategies to try and gain traction with those investigations. But it was fascinating.
Yeah.
We had like a case with a body that was left in a barrel in the Mojave Desert, and they were able to run that down. It's amazing what they're able to do. But
Did you ever think when you started your career with FBI that you'd do any of that?
no, and you know what's funny is you kind of take it for granted,
Right.
but it wasn't until, well, when they sent me to that post critical incident seminar down in Florida, they have like a pre-interview with a psychologist where she's asking, have you ever worked a major disaster? And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I have. And have you ever worked with dead bodies? I'm like, yeah, I guess but you don't kind of put it all together until like you're sitting down when you called with your list of questions. I'm like, man, I guess I have done some pretty cool stuff. But you kind of take it for granted as you're going along.
Yeah.
But
Okay, well, I've got to get moving along here because I've got so much to. Okay, so you're working at headquarters.
yep, I worked. So let me tell you real quick. So I was working in Special Events Management Unit,
Okay.
and that was part of the Counterterrorism Division.
Okay.
And at that point, they said that our headquarters put out this thing where they were going to start like putting you into, you would either be a counterterrorism agent or a violent crime agent. And I'm thinking, man, I'm in the counterterrorism division. I don't want to get stuck as a counterterrorism agent. So I transferred over to the Indian Country Unit.
Oh, okay.
And I worked at the Indian Country Unit for 2 years.
Okay, so how is that? What are you working on? Because I talked to one of my interviews is with Ernie.
Ernie Wayne.
That we
Yeah.
spoke with, and just fascinating.
Excellent agent.
Yeah, so how was that working those type of
Well,
cases?
so they also worked maritime and civilian aviation security. So we put together like the first, right after 9/11, the agent flying arm training. We put that together. And then at the same time, I was managing some Indian country matters. And we actually were going around doing gang surveys on the different Indian reservations.
Do they have a
And-
gang problem on Indian?
Oh, huge.
What
Huge.
what type of gangs?
It's amazing because they back in the day they would watch a lot of videos like music videos or rap videos, and so you would have like Bloods and Crips on the Indian reservations.
Really?
Yeah. And I've got mixed feelings on the Indian reservations because it's like a lost, in some aspects, it's like a lost civilization because those kids grow up with no real parental guidance because of the Indian schools that back in the, this is my theory and my theory alone, but they are still sending Native American children to these Native American schools. Like we had one in Riverside, and you would get kids from all over the country, from all the different tribes that would go to this Native American school in Riverside. And you're taking the kids away from the parents. The parents don't learn how to parent. The kids don't learn how to be part of a family. And they're rife with unemployment and plagued with alcoholism, and the crime rate on the reservations is remarkable. And unless you're involved in that dynamic or in that area, I think the majority of the public is unaware of what goes on those reservations.
Why did they do that? Why did they send the kids to that school?
Well, traditionally, they were trying to mainstream the kids into American society, like back in the late 1800s, and that system is still ongoing. But I'm not sure why they continue to send those kids there. But one of my first interviews out in Riverside was with a young Native girl from the Tohono O'odham reservation down south of Tucson. And there were some allegations that she had been molested by an uncle. And this girl's 15. And I go out and I said, hey, I'm here to interview you about, there's some allegations that, you may have been sexually molested by your uncle. And she said, which one? And here she had been molested by multiple relatives.
Much is the same question I had for you with FBI dealing with state and locals. How are you guys received on India reservations?
It depends. So in California, we're not involved with the Indian reservations at all. But in certain states, like here in Montana, anything above a felony or anything felony and above is prosecuted federally by the FBI. But it depends on different. In Alaska, again, the FBI, the Native Americans have chosen to fall under state jurisdiction.
But do the tribes like you on their reservations or no?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. Like in some cases, and again, it's dependent on the agent because Ernie Wyatt had a wonderful relationship with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the tribal police department. So again, it depends on the situation in the tribe and things like that.
Yeah.
So, but we have And again, it's just like such a different dynamic because on the Indian reservations, FBI agents are more like local investigators. And again, if you're not involved in Indian country, even in the FBI, people don't understand that. So my one friend was working up in Shelby, Montana, on the Blackfoot Reservation, and the crime on the reservation was so bad that the county coroner would not go onto the Indian reservation. So if someone died of unusual circumstances on the Indian reservation, the FBI agent would have to transfer that body down to Great Falls to the coroner's office. So I ended up buying that agent a stainless steel pickup bed for his bureau pickup truck because he was hauling body bags down to the coroner's office. And when you try and speak to someone at the violent crime unit that, hey, we have an agent out in Shelby, Montana that needs a stainless steel pickup truck, and explain to them he's transporting dead bodies down to Great Falls, that supervisor back at headquarters who's never had any experience with Indian country doesn't really understand the issue.
Yeah.
So it's an unusual dynamic.
Okay, so you go from headquarters to Anchorage.
Yeah.
Did you want to go there?
I did, and that's a funny story that involves my brother because my parents were away at the time and out of cell service, and I called my brother and I said, he was involved in the middle of an operation in DEA. I said, Joey, I have a chance to put in for a supervisor job in Alaska. And he said, doll sheep, and hung up the phone. And I'm like, I guess I'm putting in because he wanted to go hunting in Alaska.
No way.
But he never got up there. So,
oh my gosh. Yeah, Anchorage is an interesting town because it's, at least the times that I've been up there operationally, it's got this undertone to it. How did you find working up there?
I loved living in Alaska. I loved working up there. We had a wonderful relationship with Anchorage Police Department at the time. And, but it was eye-opening to me because they have a gang problem, but it's not like, that's another dynamic you had to explain to headquarters because they're not traditional gangs. They're like neighborhood groups that gather together, and there's a lot of like a large Samoan population up there, a large Hawaiian population, a large Hmong population, which you would not expect.
Yeah.
And I never in the world would have known that except for, having worked up there.
What type of cases? Was there man, for you guys, there's just so many different cases. Was there a typical case that you would work on in Anchorage?
The problem with Anchorage is it's a very small office. I think we had 50 agents for the entire state. And but you had to cover all the programs that the FBI traditionally covers. So I was a supervisor and I had 6 programs that I was responsible for, where in a large office like Philadelphia, a supervisor has 1 program they're responsible for. So I was responsible for the violent crime program, the OCDF program, so drug narcotics investigation. I had the human trafficking program, the crimes against children program, the crisis management program, and then computer crimes. And I supervised all of them.
Wow.
Yeah, which is difficult.
Now that you've hit on that, let me ask you about the OCDF program. I want your perspective from an FBI agent's perspective in terms of working drug cases. Do you have an opinion one way or another of if you guys should be working drug cases versus just leaving it to DEA?
So the thing that we bring to the drug cases is, again, more personnel.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it's crazy because I think that they would be better off doing federal task forces with DEA, FBI, even ATF, and doing a joint investigation so that, because I know, and it's a shame because I think in a lot of areas, federal agencies just don't work together.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all jockeying. Like, it's some of the worst obstacles that I ever ran into were interagency relationships. Like in Allentown, DEA's right down the hallway, and we're at this end of the hallway, and we don't work together, which is just insane to me.
Well, what's really weird to me is, so DEA has one mission, and is to work drugs. You guys have several missions, and you have drugs that fall under your purview. Now Homeland Security, and back in the day, Customs had the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, now we still have our own mission, but like where I see a real crossover is between FBI and HSI. I mean, what cases can you guys work on that HSI can't work on, or vice versa?
I don't really know.
I just don't get it.
I don't get it either. And the thing is, I'm not really familiar with HSI, but I know that I don't understand that entire agency, because when it was formed, what they should have done is given more money to immigration and naturalization and gotten that sorted out. And they started HSI, and all their missions overlap with the other agencies.
Right.
Every single one of them.
Right.
And in my mind, they don't have necessarily the training. And I shouldn't speak to this, but we ran into a couple situations in the Allentown area where the mission overlap was just ridiculous. And that's what I don't agree with the federal agencies, is all that jockeying for, it's just a waste to me.
Yeah.
It's just a waste to me. And now I enjoyed working drugs, but it would make sense for DEA to work the drug stuff. But I think that's never going to happen because of the money and the seizures, because that makes up such a big part of every agency's budget.
Yeah.
Is the money seizures.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so getting back, just personal question for you for Anchorage. How did you deal with 6 months out of the year totally sunny,
that.
6 months out of the year dark?
Well, it was so funny because you'd be working in your garage, like I'd be working in my garage, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, it's 11:30. I got to go to bed, because you wouldn't, like the light was there, so you didn't really register what time it was.
Yeah, you had to I had to force myself, get into the hotel and close the book.
Yeah. The good part was you could fish all night long. So, and we did a lot of that.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun. But and the darkness, like I had a harder time once I moved to Philly in the winter, because up there it was snow covered all winter, so you could ski and snowmobile and cross country ski all winter long. And in Philly, it's like dark and dreary and no snow, and you're just stuck inside. It's terrible.
Any run-in with close calls with bears up there?
Oh yeah. We I took my father-in-law up there. Well, he and my mother-in-law came up before my husband and I got married for like 10 days, and we're fishing. And up there, you get so used to it that there'll be a line of fishermen, and a bear comes out. You just kind of shift left. Then the bear comes up here, you shift right. And my father-in-law just couldn't wrap his mind around that. And this bear came down and grabbed somebody's camera bag off the thing. And it must have been a young bear, because he batted in the water, bound in the water, batted back up and we watched that bear play catch with that bag for like 10 minutes, from here to the window away.
What you're saying is so true. I remember driving 2 hours to go fish on maybe the Copper River. You get down there, you're in the middle of nowhere, you show up, and there's like 50 people fishing.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay. And then next thing you know, a bear comes down, and nobody's freaking out. They're just like moving aside. And I'm like, this is too much.
My first time fishing, I was down there, and there was a bear across the river, and there's a fella at my shoulder, And I'm getting a little like, oh, and he's like, don't worry about it. He's like, if it starts swimming, we can move. So it just sat over there and ate some salmon, and we kept fishing, and it was fine.
Okay, so you end up your career, you end up retiring out of the Philadelphia division. So you're
Yeah.
back home.
I did. So my dad, about a year before we lost him, he wasn't feeling well, and I had reconnected with my now husband Ralph, who I had dated before I joined the bureau, and I had a chance to go to Philly, and I called my dad, and he said, "Yeah, I think it's time for you to come home." So I got to Philly a year before we lost my dad. So I got to spend a year with them.
But I think the FBI does a pretty nice job, especially toward the end, of getting you to where you want to go.
Well, we have an office of preference system that I don't think DEA
No,
has.
no, for sure not.
So we can put our name on a list to get to an office that we want to get to end our career.
Before I forget to ask you this,
Sure.
because and I think there's vast differences in retirement kind of organizations and stuff between DEA and FBI. So you guys have a nice system of office of preference. Tell me this. So you have your LEOSA card, right? Which enables
Yes.
you to carry in all 50
I do.
states. How does FBI handle, you have to qualify once a year with that.
Correct.
Can you go into your local FBI office?
No.
You can't?
We cannot.
Oh, I thought I was going to
No.
rag on DEA.
I think it depends on the office.
Okay.
So I just qualified, and I qualified with a retired agent that is qualified to provide the LEOSA training.
Okay, because when I retired, that's one thing I kind of blew a gasket about, which is
It's ridiculous.
the FBI. I had heard FBI took care of them and they could go
No.
and DEA couldn't.
Now,
and it's
certain
like,
offices, I think it's dependent on the special agent in charge.
Okay.
But officially, they will not provide it.
Okay, I'm going to take back my criticism of my own agency. Okay.
But yeah, the office of preference system is fun. But when I was a brand new agent and first got to New York, there was a guy on the applicant squad, and if you were a senior agent and like messed up or fouled up some way, they'd put you back on the applicant squad. So this guy was kind of a disgruntled employee, and he had the office of preference. It was a book back then, like a printout.
Oh.
And you'd go by his desk and he'd have it highlighted with notes about the people ahead of him, how old their kids were and all this stuff. And I said, "Jack, where are you trying to get?" And he's like, "Newark." He was just trying to go from New York to Newark, and he couldn't get transferred out of there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple last things I want to talk to you about. So the first thing, when we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, tell me how often, or is it normal for FBI headquarters to dictate to the agents in the field how to do a case or what cases to work on?
Okay, so that depends on program.
Okay.
And so with the violent crime cases, unless it's something like super high profile, like a serial murder investigation or something of that nature, headquarters doesn't really dictate, the investigative steps you're going to take or anything like that. Now, like with the OSDEF cases, you want headquarters involved because that's where your budget's coming from. Undercover cases for the Bureau are super under the microscope with headquarters involvement. But, and again, like we had a case in Allentown where the mayor was indicted, and anytime there's a political figure, headquarters is going to call the shots.
Sure.
Down to what you wear on the search warrant.
Really?
Yeah, they dictated that we had to wear suits on that search warrant.
Okay.
Which you would never typically do because usually the places you're going into don't warrant wearing a suit.
Yeah.
So
let's talk a little bit about the January 6th stuff. We had mentioned, I just want to talk about your personal interaction there because, I hear a little bit about, this agent down in Florida who was complaining that FBI headquarters was telling him how to do stuff. But what was your What was your experience with January 6 people?
So what they ended up doing is appointing one person in our office to handle most of those investigations, and they were being directed from headquarters and very closely by the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Okay.
And those investigations were driven, and I think I mentioned to you earlier, normally FBI does not get involved in misdemeanor investigations. But in this case, the majority of the charges were, as you said, like interference with an elected official,
public official, yeah.
or misdemeanor trespass.
Yeah.
Now, the people that fought with the police, I'm all for prosecuting those people to the hilt, but a lot of people just wandered into the Capitol
Right.
once the doors were open, and even those fellas were prosecuted.
Right. And so can you tell a little bit about your experience of actually interviewing some of these people?
Sure. Well, we had, and as I mentioned to you, it was a little unsettling because we actually had people reporting on other people saying, hey, this person was at the rally. And sometimes those people, this person was at the rally, they went to the Capitol, and you'd go and speak to the person, and he was like a high-ranking member of the Republican Party in Lehigh Valley, and he said, I was at the rally, but then my wife and I went out for dinner. We never went anywhere near the Capitol. So it was a lot of misinformation or, informing on your neighbor type thing, which was very unsettling to me.
Yeah. So so you had told me this story, but on your 302s, on some of these that you're interviewing, I think you eventually got to the point, well, not you got to the point, but your supervisor got tired of seeing something on your report. So can you talk about that?
I basically would talk to the individual that I was interviewing, and if they were at the rally, I'm like, well, then you were just exercising your First Amendment right to free speech. And finally, the guy's like, yeah, that's exactly what I was doing. So that went into a couple of reports, and then I didn't have to go interview those January 6 people anymore.
It's crazy.
We did have legitimate, a couple individuals that actually had fought with the police from our area. And as I said before, I'm all for prosecuting those folks.
Yeah.
So, but it was a very difficult situation.
Yeah. Okay, two last questions I always ask. Tell me, did law enforcement affect your family?
Yes. When I was out in LA and working the crimes against children cases, I had 3 stepdaughters at the time. And, just focusing on those crimes against children cases, I became a super hyperactive, like they didn't go to if we went to a ball game, they weren't going to the restroom by themselves or, something like that. And that impacted. And then my husband, of course, now he gets tired of hearing about all my law enforcement stories, but there were, you know how it is. Like, we worked long days, and I'd leave for the office at 6 a.m. and sometimes get home at 8 o'clock at night. And of course that's going to impact your family.
But did it help? Was there an understanding that you were married to another law enforcement officer, right?
Initially.
Yeah, initially. Did that help?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to answer that because my husband, Ralph, now, he is super understanding with the job. And I'd be getting calls from sources in the middle of the night and traveling to Puerto Rico with task force officers. So it'd be me and 2 guys going to Puerto Rico for the weekend, for an operation. And Ralph was awesome about it, where maybe that might cause problems in a bad, in a different relationship.
Well, I guess my question was, in terms of, I'll ask 2 questions then. I was wondering if being married to another law enforcement officer who kind of understands the job would help.
I think it depends on the individual.
Okay.
Because it didn't help in my
Okay.
situation.
So how about for
So-
Ralph? How long had you been on the job when you got married?
We got married in 2016.
Yeah. So how?
So I'd been on probably, my math's not great. That's why I went to law school.
but for a while, for a while,
probably 18 years.
Yeah, so a decent amount of time. And had he kind of gotten used to, because even 18 years, you're still hustling out
Yeah,
there.
oh yeah.
So has he kind of realized, hey, this is who I've married?
Oh
She's
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, he's been great about it. But like, I had two sources that would call, like, I mean, they were just a mess. And they would call in the middle of the night and 2 o'clock in the morning, where the one guy had gotten in a fight with his stripper girlfriend and his wife at the same time. And I'm just like, I mean, and Ralph just kind of went with it.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, that's so-and-so's calling again. You know, it was funny.
I mean, the one thing that kind of resonates with me about what you said in terms of working the crimes against children is one of the other female detectives said the exact same thing. She said you become super vigilant about, making sure your kids.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like we went to drop off our 4-year-old at church when I was out in California, and I noticed the kid. There was like a 28-year-old young man with no wedding ring working in the preschool, and I'm like, yeah, we're not leaving the kid here. Like, she's going to church with us because I'm not. You get a little judgmental.
Yeah. Okay. So with that being said, last question that I always ask: can you look back? And I'm even going to go to when you became a DA, assistant DA. Can you look back to when you started till now? Has your views on society and people changed?
I think so.
In what way?
I think so. You're just more observant about little things that wouldn't mean anything to anyone else, but mean something to you as an investigator. For instance, like you see people in circumstances and you realize what's going on before anyone else has a clue, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Like you drive by a trailer that's got a brand new 300 Chrysler sitting in the driveway, and you know exactly what's going on there, but yeah, I think it makes you a lot more judgmental.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
It absolutely makes
Yeah.
sense. I asked Joe this question. I'm going to leave you with this question. Who did your dad like more?
Well, the son is always the favorite.
Yeah, but you
But
went
I
to
was the
FBI.
youngest,
And you
yeah.
went to FBI.
I
and
was the youngest, yeah.
Okay.
And he did give me the picture.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah, but it was I had a wonderful career. I mean, I enjoyed every minute of it. And when I retired, I thought I was really going to have a problem with retirement, missing the job, because I loved investigations. I loved drug search warrants. I mean, I enjoyed every aspect of the job. I loved putting people in jail.
And you haven't had a problem then
I
retiring?
have not. But my mom got sick.
Yeah.
And she's 90 and she got seriously ill, and I moved in with her shortly after, like 2 weeks after I retired. And so that's kind of given me a focus. But yeah, I miss the job a lot. But it was a wonderful career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Annie. Really appreciate the interview.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.